that period of time. And then they correlate that with polls indicating who supports which candidate. And they found, consistently throughout time that media coverage leads polls. Media coverage that's predominantly pro-politician X will lead to poll movements in favor of politician X. But also, I think they started in the 2000s, maybe the late 90s, but in the late 80s, this guy, David Fan, kind of an overlooked work, but I think it was excellent, did basically the exact same thing as they're now doing for money. He took Associated Press dispatches. And AP dispatches disseminate throughout the US media system, right? So he took AP dispatches and he coded them for what he called infons, basically little bits of information, essentially the same thing as memes. And he coded them for whether these bits of information would lead one to be supportive or in opposition to whatever it is they were describing. So for instance, if there was an AP dispatch about a report that Saddam Hussein was trying to buy yellow cake uranium from Niger, he would code that as likely to lead to support for a war, and so on and so forth. And what he did is he created a computer model just based on this coding of memes and AP dispatches that accurately, successfully predicted public opinion trends for 6 issues over months of time. And that's essentially what MediaTender does too, and it basically it follows also from the theoretical perspective here that the information supply you have is a powerful determinant of what possible interpretations of that supply you can come up with. You guys have probably already heard of these areas of media effects theory or media effects research. I won't go into them very much. This is kind of the triad, the ones that everyone talks about as this is the proof of media effects, blah, blah, blah. Priming, agenda setting, whatever's on the media agenda powerfully influences whatever the public thinks is an important aspect of the political agenda. So that also goes straight to the problem of omission. If it's not on the media's agenda, it's not going to be on the public's agenda unless there's some other source whereby that information can get into people's heads. Unlikely. Framing, basically how you package a news story. What is the story you're telling with the basic facts you're transmitting? So since this whole presentation is basically just describing other people's research, I thought I'd just delve into a little bit that I did on my own with a colleague here at UCI on framing to kind of illustrate the whole thing. So framing research, again and again and again, shows that the way a story is framed powerfully influences people's opinions on that story in the direction of the frame. So if you get a story framing, Saddam Hussein as a massive threat that might kill us all, that's going to tend, on average, to push people's opinions in the direction of believing that Saddam Hussein is a massive threat who, is a threat to us all. This guy Mauro Porto at Tulane argued some 10 years ago that what the media should do instead of having one frame, which it typically does, it should have multiple frames in every single news story, multiple opposing frames that are equally strongly presented, so that instead of just getting one way of viewing a story, you're forced to be exposed to contradictory framings of the same story. So that's what we wanted to test. Basically, what we did is we measured people's foreign policy values before splitting them from left and right, and isolationist or interventionist, so you'd have 4 quadrants. Gave them questions that would basically put them in one of those quadrants, what your values are when it comes to foreign policy. Then we'd give them a news article about the crisis in Ukraine from a few years ago, and then we'd ask them what their opinions about the proper policy to follow with regard to Ukraine. And those policy options fit in that 4-quadrant ideological foreign policy values setup. So it could either be left-wing isolationist, left-wing interventionist, right-wing isolationist, right-wing interventionist. And we found, just like all of the previous framing research, that when you got just one frame, you ended up being pushed in the direction of that frame in terms of your opinion. So people who started off with the purple left interventionist and then read the left interventionist frame, they ended up very much in agreement with that perspective. Likewise with right-wing interventionists, they got a lot of support after reading just one article from that perspective. Same with right-wing isolationists. They got a lot of support for that perspective after reading that article, regardless of what their foreign policy values were ahead of time. But when they got all four perspectives in one article, so four equally balanced frames, which Porto describes as the news diversity standard, what media should attempt to do, provide a true diversity of perspective in every news story, then we basically saw very little movement. People would still move. They would still be convinced by various parts of the four different frames they were exposed to, but they weren't manipulated in the way that it seems normally occurs when you just get one frame of the story, where you see opinion dramatically shifting in the direction of that frame. And visualize just a different way, this is before where people kind of end up in this four-quadrant ideological foreign policy space. After they get the four frames in one story, they end up kind of converging toward the center. Oh, you know what? I was counting backwards, I thought. Okay. Anyway, so moving on past media effects, it's